you're on the shared track about maintainership issues. I apologize for the technical problems in the beginning, but I hope it will work better from now. My name is Cornelia Huck. I'm a developer with Red Hat in the virtualization team. And yeah, just go ahead and let's start. I will talk about various topics in this talk, just including defining what my vision of what a maintainer is supposed to do is. And then I'm going from the easy stuff, which is technical stuff, to the more squishy human factors. And probably the hardest one is just keeping sane yourself. So let's start. Just basically, who am I? I've already told you I'm working in the Red Hat virtualization team. I have been working with Linux and with QEMU for quite a long time, especially with Linux. I'm mostly active in the mainframe area, but since I have branched out a bit, so there's more of that. Maintainer for Linux, that was KVM, S390 and virtualization I've started doing since 2012. QEMU a bit later, it was also virtualization. And as a contributor, I've been doing Linux stuff for quite some years. As you can see, that is the pre-Git and pre-Bitkeeper area. And QEMU I've started out a bit later. It's only when I finally started with virtualization. So what I have is both a perspective as a maintainer, what I'm doing when I'm acting as a maintainer, and the perspective when I'm interacting with other maintainers, when I want somebody to merge my code, for example. So, having said that, I want to present it not only for people who actually maintain some stuff, but also for people who just interact with maintainers, and so maybe want to know what does a maintainer do, why are they sometimes so strange, why aren't they sometimes not very strange, but just like everybody else, and so on. And of course, disclaimer, your mileage may vary. Everybody has different perspective on things. Everybody works with different projects, and if you are not doing Linux or QEMU, you may have a whole different experience, obviously. So, what in my perspective does a maintainer actually do? Basically, a maintainer is somebody who is responsible for a project, a piece of a project, some technical part, and they deal with various things. One thing is, of course, the name comes from maintenance. You have stuff, you have the usual things, ecosystems evolve, you need to adapt, you need to make sure it keeps in good place. There are bugs that are found, you need to make sure that bug fixes are developed and merged. You also need to keep up, for example, with hardware changes and stuff like that, all really depending on what area of code you are working in. So that's a really big part, basically keep the thing going. Another big part, as I said, gatekeeper. You obviously want other people to be able to merge things into your code part. To not only bug fixes, but also enhancements and making things nicer and so on. But you also have to look, sometimes it's not quite what is good for the project. So you are a gatekeeper and saying, okay, this is not quite what I want, please don't do it differently, and so on. And as I've said, coming from hardware and ecosystem changes, you also need to coordinate with a lot of other people. For example, if I'm doing QEMU work, I have an upstream consumer, or an upstack consumer, for example, libvirt. So I need obviously to coordinate with libvirt developers so that they actually have some decent interfaces to consume. And on the other hand, I, for example, need to interact with kernel developers. So I'm using sane interfaces and it will work together. And another piece of people you want to interact with are, of course, your users. Because if you just write software and nobody is using it, that's not really sensible, other than a hobby project, for example. But if your users have requirements or ideas, you probably want to listen to them. And another part is also sharing information just about what you are doing. For example, writing blogs, talking about things at conferences, just like now, even if I'm not talking about technical stuff today. But that really gets the word out. You get perhaps more users, more developers, and maybe people will come to you and also give you some ideas what you can do better and what is not working out so well and so on. And there's, of course, a maintainer is not responsible for every little thing. For example, when bugs are there, it is not your own responsibility to fix it. If somebody breaks it, it is first the responsibility of the people who broke things to fix them. Of course, you should help. If it's an easy fix, just do it, but you'll be dead and inundated in work pretty soon if you fix everybody's bugs. And the same thing, which can also cost you a lot of time, is if you're doing hand-holding. Some people seem to expect that you guide them along every little step. That's not what, it's not the case if you have some newbies coming in and you have to bring them up to speed and mentor them a bit. That's of course all great stuff and you should do that, especially because it brings new blood in. But some people just never seem to progress past that stage, and these are really time sinks. So I don't think that's something a maintainer should do. And most importantly, other people are other people. You can't really control what they are doing. You can deal with it, you can make allowances for other people, and you can push back if they are doing bad things, but you can't control them. So now to the more easy stuff. The technical stuff, it will not be very technical. One important thing I found when I started out as a maintainer is that you need to find your own workflow. Things that work for you, that work for the project. Everybody has some different preferences. Some people really like detailed planning and follow their plans onwards, and it works very well for them. I'm not one of those people. I like to be more flexible, and if something interesting or something new comes along, I like to be able to throw the switch. And and it also, of course, depends on your project. You have sometimes highly dynamic projects where lots of new people with new ideas are coming in, and something that was really the wage 3 months ago is now completely outdated and something like that. And that is, of course, a completely different environment to work in if you have something more conservative, with few people contributing, and you basically know where you will be going in the next 2 years. It's just a slight evolution of what exists today, making it better. You won't really have any groundbreaking changes anyway, but you will have in the first case. So if you have many newbies coming in, you will expect to need to mentor them a bit, bring them on the right track, have them become a contributor. If you have just working with few experienced people, you can assume many things that they already know how to do that, and you don't need to help them. So what is the main takeaway for me here? Drop around for ideas. Look what other people are doing, look what other projects are doing. There's usually something interesting you can pick from there, but sometimes it's just won't work for you. For example, I have tried something like these, remember the milk system, which many people like for time planning. It did not work out at all for me. So yeah, try it out, but if it doesn't work, look for something else. And what's also important is that you let people know what you're actually doing. What I find as a contributor most annoying is a maintainer black box. You drop a patch on the mailing list, and suddenly it's upstream. And you have no idea when was it accepted, has somebody reviewed it, and so on. And yeah, I don't want to go calling other people branches if they have merged something. So I always try to let people know, hey, I've applied your patch. But I also need to let people know, hey, I will not apply your patch because it has this and that problem, or because it's going into the wrong direction. And what's also important is let people know why you rejected it. You are not rejecting it because you are a mean person, but because you think it is not the correct way to go for the project. Or perhaps you just say, okay, it's quite right, just do those little changes and let them know which changes you are looking for. And of course, especially if you are maintaining a very busy subsystem, you will get lots of patches to review and lots of patches and more serious. And there's another one waiting. And sometimes you just don't have the time, or maybe you're on vacation and your backup maintainer is sick or something like that. Then just ping them and say, okay, sorry, can't just look into it. Ping me in 2 weeks if I haven't come to it. Something like that. That's also very helpful for contributors. And speaking of overload, it's always good to spread the load. Of course, what I call here our robotic overloads, automated CI, scripts, and so on. If you can automate it, spend some time to have it done. And just, if you, for example, the QEMU project has been using the patch queue server, and now I see people are sending patches to the QEMU mailing list. They are processed by patch queue, and I can look at the status. And if something, for example, fails to compile, breaks something, I already see it in patch queue, and I don't really have to review that series again. That's really, really helpful, because you go on and look at the series, try to apply it, then you notice it's broken. If some automation tool has already caught these problems, it's called, of course, you have more time for other stuff. And another resource, so to say, are of course other developers. If you have been around for some time, you usually know who is an expert in what and who may be able to help you, for example, review something, or whom you may ask if they have an idea how to best to handle some interaction or something like that. So do it, ask them, and it's very likely that they will actually help you. And yes, of course, general public, as I said before, blog posts, talks, and so on are also helpful, because they may attract interested people who may really become valuable contributors later on. Now to this squishy human stuff. The thing is, we usually don't have computers writing the code. These are human beings. And human beings have also different preferences. It's not just the project that are different, and it's not just you yourself who are different. It's just the same. Some people really like careful planning, others are more flexible and jumping around and stuff. That's all. They can all be very valuable contributors, but you have to be able to deal with this. And on top of this, of course, people have different cultural backgrounds. Somebody from Asia will act differently than somebody from Central Europe, for example, like in direct speech and how curt you will be and so on. And yeah, language barriers can also be really a problem. I think we can assume that people know some basic English and can clearly express their thoughts in that language. But sometimes there are idioms which other people may not understand and stuff like that, and that can cause some friction, which is not at all intended. And coming to this, the really cool stuff is you get to work with a lot of people, but they sometimes really have their things which I'd like to call quirks. Maybe somebody doesn't like to code on Saturday or whatever. That would be okay. A strange example. But for example, with some people you can do jokes and so on, and they will actually enjoy it. And with other people, it's much better if you stay matter of fact and just point to the facts, and they're happy with this. And even more other people, they like, okay, your patch is very nice, and I'll have to write a novel first with how nice your patch is, and then I can point out the one thing I don't like. yeah, it's an extreme example, but different people like different stuff in that. And of course, you have also to look what the people are doing. Are they doing it for a living? Is it somebody who has worked for 20 years in the industry and are paid by a company? That is a very different developer from somebody who is just maybe in school or university, has discovered an interesting project and is just taking it. You'll want to deal with those people differently. Of course, you can't always see it on mailing lists, especially if people are using alias email addresses. But yeah, just try to be a bit aware that there may be really differences. And coming with that, you as a maintainer can sometimes fall into traps. What I call here the dictator and the doormat. Both are extremes, both are not very conductive either to you or to the project. If you want to control everything, have every little typographic thing in your comments exactly to your liking, and look at everything and review everything, you'll be dead. Especially if you are maintaining a busy subsystem, because there's constantly stuff floating in, and yeah, nobody can deal with that except that. I mean, some people can, I have no idea how they do it, but mere mortals can't. And I think sometimes the hardest thing is to accept a patch which is completely fine, does what it is supposed to do, and it works fine, and it's documented and all. It's just not the way you would have done it. And being able to merge such a patch, that's also a sign that you can deal with it and not falling into the dictator trap. Now there's the other extreme, which I call the doormat, when everybody is walking over you. If you just accept undiscriminately everything people are throwing at you, and you don't push back if they are really going into silly directions, that is also not helping, because people know, you are an easy target, let's just flush it in while that maintainer is not being so overly critical. No, bad way to go. And one thing I also wanted to point out, because many people are working for companies, there are also sometimes company politics influencing what they are doing. For example, if somebody is working on a project and they have a plan of the company, it needs to be done, needs to be upstream, they will push for suboptimal stuff sometimes, just to get it upstream so they can report to their superiors, hey, we're upstream. And you need to show them that it's not because you are mean that you are not allowing their code in, but because there are problems with the code. Yeah, and of course, it often does not really work out like you want it to do. We all want to be nice human beings, arguing in a polite way with each other, and in a helpful way, and get great code done, but that's not reality. Especially if you are people who are really passionate about their work and want to and really care for what they are doing, and maybe also have kind of temper, then it can get really, really heated, and words are said that should not be said and stuff like that, and people are leaving because they can't stand it anymore, and that is not what you want. It happens. Especially if you are one of those persons who is likely to have a temper, it's sometimes really good to just step back. Don't write that email, just save it in a drafts folder. I've heard that a lot of people do that, and just send it the next day when you will have completely rewritten that angry email. So that can help. And what's even worse is if you see two valuable contributors just going head to head over some issue, and you as a bystander say, what are they arguing about? They want nearly the same thing. And it's sometimes good if you can find a kind of neutral third party and just ping someone offline, hey, can you just put in some soothing words here? It sometimes can really help and smooth it out again. But of course there are people who like that. They are always trolls. Sometimes a bit of funny trolling can be very entertaining in the right context, but mostly it's rather counterproductive. And there are also always sometimes people at the sideline who like to fan the flames and just stir it up a bit, because that can also be a bit of fun. But yeah, it's probably the best. You need to be aware that there certainly are those people, and try to find out if you can diffuse the situation somehow. And really, as I said before, rejecting ideas is a hard thing. Sometimes it's just not the direction you want the project to take. Sometimes the approach they are taking just cannot work at all, even if you would like the direction. Then it is sometimes you always need to separate the idea and the code from the person. It's not the person that the person is dumb, usually not. They are usually very, very clever people if they are actually in a situation that they are able to produce patches for QEMU or the kernel. So try to find a way that you can tell them, hey, it's cool that you are working on that kind of stuff, but I am afraid it won't work because. Yeah, and that brings me to the last place, and that is you yourself as a maintainer. Yeah, so kittens are always good. Yeah, the thing is, being a maintainer or being a developer can be generally quite stressful. It just happens. You have lots of work to do. Even if everybody is very nice, it's still, yes, you have to deal with sometimes with tricky technical issues. You have to deal with tricky people. You may be a tricky person yourself, yeah, but that's probably what you can change a bit and be aware of it. So what I personally found helpful is just not to set a timer, but just to reserve a slot at least once a day to get a clear head. Do whatever you need to get your head clear. Maybe do a walk outside if the weather is halfway reasonable. Grab some people for some soccer game or whatever, table soccer game. That's always very helpful. I have the experience. Or do some video gaming, read something, whatever you need to just flush your brain. Because sometimes it's not even when, I think most people know that when coding, sometimes you are sitting and staring at the code and it just won't work out. And then you just do something completely different for a while, then you come back, okay, that's where the problem is. And the same thing happens when you are a maintainer. You just have all those people wanting something and merging something, and you have to talk to these and to these. Yeah, just perhaps take a quick walk and do a bit better. And saying that if you have somebody you can chat with, that's always really, really helpful. It may be somebody who is familiar with what you are doing, so you can say, oh, they are doing to do this in this QEMU subsystem, and they actually understand what you are talking about, what the QEMU subsystem is. But sometimes it can also be a friend who is doing something completely different, and you can just know a bit, and they will nod sagely and hand you another cup of coffee, and that can also really help. And what's also important to know is that you are not the only maintainer on the world, obviously. There are many, many people. And if you can just talk to them, exchange experiences with them, and find out what works for them, and on the same time tell them what worked for you, that's also, yes, you are not feeling isolated. That's, I think, a really, really important thing. Yeah, but sometimes you are just stuck. You may feel you are in a position which it has become untenable for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's so much stuff. You are doing this, and it's basically all very interesting, but it's just way too much. And that's where it comes in what I mentioned some slides before. Just look around. There are usually other people as well. There are maybe some people who have been working on the topics you're interested in. Ask them, can you help review? Maybe they will be willing to become a co-maintainer or a subsystem maintainer under you or something like that. Find some people who can set up test systems for you so you don't have to do it yourself. That's usually a thing that developers are not very good at, so it's to people who can set up test systems. And all of that can really help just to lighten the load a bit. But sometimes you have been working at one area for a long time. You are the complete expert. You know everything. You know every bit. You know what device change pending in a subchannel result is, or something like that. Yeah. And yes, and you're feeling you are stuck. You don't see anything new on the horizon, and that's okay. Sometimes you may be able just to move on to a neighboring interest thing. Don't become stuck if you don't feel you are getting anything anymore out of it, even if you are the expert. Find others you can pass your expertise to, and see if you can find something else which will be more interesting for you in the long run. It doesn't really help if you end up doing something you don't enjoy doing anymore. And the next point is something I find very important. Don't let yourself be forced to do something that is doing you harm. Maybe you are working in a company. Your company has been lucky in getting that new shiny driver upstream, but then you find out you are not a very good maintainer. That kind of work is not what you are good at doing. You are a much better coder, for example, but interacting with other people, having to deal with requests and so on, is something that completely stresses you out. And in some companies there can be pressure. You are the expert, you need to be the maintainer. And yes, if it's something that is actively hurting you because it is completely going against your personality, not good. I know that sometimes options are limited what you can do that, but hurting yourself is never a very good idea. So that comes to last time. That's why I used that picture here. Sometimes it's just time to move on. If you're not feeling well there, or if you are just feeling bored, that also happens, move on. There's nothing bad in that. Nobody is telling you to be wedded to the same thing or piece of code or the same area of expertise for the whole of your life. That would be really silly. Some people like to do the same stuff for 20 years or so. That's also absolutely fine, but if you find that you are just being strangled or hemmed in, no. Just find something else. There's usually some kind of way you can do it, even if you have other constraints. So now to the questions. No questions?
This isn't really a question, it's something I'd like to add to your, should say no. It's a mistake I've made often. A patch comes along and I look at it and say, okay, this is a terrible idea, I'm not going to merge it. But telling that to the submitter would be awkward. So what I do instead is I shoot a truckload of holes in this flaw patch in the hope they despair and go away. What they do is they do a lot of work on the patch and they come back. And now it's even more awkward to tell them this is a terrible idea, I'm not going to merge it.
Has happened to me as well.
How do you, and you talked about not being too evaluating every single character to have it perfect, but sometimes you have patches where, maybe the grammar's not right, or, the style is not exactly right, and it's actually much faster to just modify that. Like, how do you handle that? Because it's actually, the patch is not my work.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how maintainers are actually supposed to handle that, or what's generally accepted, if I'm just allowed to modify the patch.
Yeah. Also, what I usually do, if it's really just some minor typos or stuff like that, or just rephrasing the commit message, I say I'm going to apply it, but I'm going to use that commit message, and I'm trying to get an ACK from the original author, and then I'll merge it with the change commit message, and will add a comment that I modified the commit message or
Okay.
something like that.
Thank you.
So one of the things you alluded to is the fact that we can diffuse a lot of patch situations if the maintainers themselves just got a little more support. Would it happen to be anything you'd be interested in setting up a maintainer support organization? Because there are definitely a load of us who could do with that stuff.
Maintainers Anonymous. I think it would be quite interesting to join with other maintainers, especially someone like you who is a very active subsystem maintainer.
Do we need a maintainer summit? Well, that's what I was thinking. Maintainer support summit.
So yeah, or maybe just something meeting online and chatting a bit about.
Maintainer spa summit.
It sounds like an interesting idea, yeah.
Well, I look forward to you spearheading
I can forward them an email on various lists. So anybody else?
So I suppose if there are maintainers here, some of them might be Linux or QEMU maintainers, some of them might be maintainers of projects using GitHub or something like that. So as a maintainer of projects using one workflow, I think you should try contributing to a project, just like for a weekend hack, to a project that uses the other workflow, because then you understand what contributors go through when they are used to GitHub and they come to your email-based workflow and they cannot understand even how to send a patch. Or on the other hand, also the other way around. So when people are used to email-based workflow, they come to GitHub and then see that patches are squashed into one big commit and they're like crazy. They don't understand how to send multiple versions of the patches. They are both completely different workloads. Sorry, they are both completely different workloads, but they are also workloads that have their own merits. So you are not the one that has the truth. Even doesn't matter if you are using the old one or the new one. Try to put yourself in the feet of your contributors, because sometimes even a very experienced, very clever programmer might just have workflow issues that hinder their contribution.
Yeah, that's a very good idea to just get different perspectives.
I have a question about a very long series when you have 80 or 120 patches. Sometimes I try to split them and then the maintainer say, but I don't want to add a new feature if I don't see the final use of that feature.
Yeah.
What's the difference for a maintainer?
If you see just a large patch series with 80 patches or whatever, you just say, okay, what I'm going to do with it. There's bound to be somewhere in there some little thing, and then he will resend all of the 80 patches again. I don't want that. So, and I also can understand the problem that if you are introducing some new API, that you also want to be able to see what that API is supposed to be used for. So what I would suggest is split it up into an API part, into a usage part. Each are a bit more manageable, and say, okay, that's the API part here, and here over here, that's the actual user of it. And so an interested person can just look and say, okay, that is what they are trying to do. And it makes review easier, and it makes even review of the API easier, because you understand what they are trying to ultimately accomplish.
And also write unit tests.
Yes.
I mean, it can sound obvious, but it's a serious suggestion, because if you have unit tests, then you can understand the API without seeing the users yet.
Yes.
So So it at least makes it possible to review patch 1 without having read patch 80 before.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing I would add is it's like if you're not quite sure how you want to structure a patch set or what's going to work for the maintainer, you can always kind of just send out an email that says, this is roughly what I'm planning.
Yeah.
Does this structure work, or would you rather I tried it a different way? That's much nicer to receive as a maintainer than like an 80 patch set.
Yeah. And the final thing is, if you
You have to wait for the semaphore.
too far away.
So if you're going to face the conventional question of what is the use of this API, it also helps to actually have people who are willing to appear on the mailing list saying, I want to use the API, because then the maintainer doesn't have to decide. You already have what looks like a pre-built user community. So you need to find allies who are willing to actually make that statement once the patch series is published.
Yep.
Do you think it's up to the maintainer to find reviewers of the code? Because there are some subsystems where you come and you're just being ignored by the maintainer. And you ping him like, what's going on? And he's like, well, try to find somebody who's going to review your work. And yet you're not familiar with the community. What do you think about such maintainers or such attitude? Do you think that maintainer has to review all the patches on the mailing list?
I think the maintainer can't review all the patches on the mailing list. That's plainly impossible. I think that's where you need to bring in other people. But it's not only you're the new contributor, you have never interacted with the community, so just find among the people you don't know somebody who is willing to review your stuff. That's not really helpful. What I would probably do is just look at the series, do some very, very high level review, and maybe just ping some other people and say, hey, you and you all have done something different, can you help review the series? And then when the contributor comes back, I can actually actively point them to those persons and say, hey, they have looked at your stuff last time, please try to include them as well and try to collect reviews from them. I think it's just initially the maintainer should help the new contributor find other people. But after some time, you can expect from the contributor that they are able to find people themselves. Nobody? Okay. So, thank you.